You know, when I was your age, about 10 years old, there were a few inventions that took place that I had no idea when I was your age how they would transform everything. I one time gave a lecture on discoveries and inventions. Nobody came. I thought it'd be a great way to make money, but it wasn't. But inventions are very important and nobody knows quite what they're going to do. One of the inventions was the telegraph. When Mr. Morse invented it, nobody would buy it. They laughed. Another invention was the steam engine. Nobody had any idea what would happen to that. Mr. Fulton invented it. They called it Fulton's Folly. Who would have known we'd have steam locomotives traversing the entire continent? Who would have known in those days that we would have a cable all the way to England, and the president before me was able to speak to the Queen of England on the telegraph? They've changed society. Another invention that changed things was the cotton gin. It was a machine that took the little seeds out of the cotton. When our country was first founded, we didn't have all the land that we have now. And there was some slavery in the country in those days. In fact, before we were a country, every single colony had slavery. After we became our own nation, we started getting rid of slavery. And by the time I was your age, more than half of the states, not colonies anymore, had gotten rid of slavery, and everybody expected that to happen. Now, in the original colonies and the original 13 states, they were only in the Northeast and the Southeast. But Mr. Jefferson, the third president, gave us more land, and suddenly we had the Northwest. Well, they made a law, and they said that Northwest territory, the territories would never have slavery. And when I was your age, I thought, you know, as people move out into the territories, they won't be able to have slavery, and they'll form states, and everybody, North as well as South, expected eventually there'll be no more slavery. But it didn't turn out that way. That cotton gin machine made growing cotton much more lucrative, and people made money, and all over the world they wanted American cotton. And so they started expanding and thinking, we have got to make more plantations to grow cotton. But they couldn't go west because the South was the place where you grew cotton. And in those days, the southwest part of the United States belonged to Mexico. So you know what they did? They moved to Mexico and they started plantations in Mexico. Well, all of a sudden, Mexico was overrun with Americans forming plantations and raising cotton and bringing their slaves. And so you know what they did in Mexico? They made a law against slavery, and the people that were Americans in Mexico, they thought they'd leave. They didn't. They said, we ain't gonna submit, and we'll declare independence, and we'll call it Texas. And that's how Texas was formed. They seceded from Mexico. Well, Mexico didn't like that, and they started rattling the war sword, and the people in Texas didn't think they were going to be able to have a good outcome, so they joined the United States. And we ended up with their war. Well, guess what? We won. And now all of a sudden the whole Southwest became part of the United States. When that happened, that's the first time our nation looked as it does today. At that point, 3/4 of our national territory was reserved for freedom. The old Northwest, the old Northeast, and now the new Southwest. Only the Southeast was reserved for slavery. But you know what happened? Within 5 years, that had reversed. And now the Southwest, the Northwest, and the Southeast were all reserved for slavery. Only the Northeast was free. And that's why the Republican Party started. It looked like slavery was going to take over. Well, I wasn't the first candidate that ran for president, but I was the first one that actually won. And when I became the president-elect, the South thought, we're going to have to run for our money because we know what he's going to do. He's a Republican. He's going to not allow us to have slavery all over the nation. And we thought that's what they wanted. Well, guess what? They started forming their own country, but they had promised that they would stay in the United States. And I had a big problem. Was I going to let them do this or not? Well, I decided not, and the war came. So we'll let the next man come and explain his side.
Good morning. I am Robert Edward Lee. In January of 1865, I would become the overall commander of all Confederate forces in the field. However, in January of 1861, I was serving as Lieutenant Colonel of the 1st Division, 2nd U.S. Cavalry at Fort Mason, Texas. On February 1st of 1861, two important things would happen. First one would be that Texas would secede from the Union, now making it 7 states that have left. Arkansas, Tennessee, Virginia, and North Carolina were still waiting to see what was going to happen. The second important thing would be that I would be recalled from Fort Mason, Texas to Washington City. I had no idea why I was being recalled, but when I did arrive in Washington, I was twice offered command of all federal forces in the field. However, it was a position that I could not take, because my destiny was going to be tied to which way Virginia went. If Virginia stayed in the Union, I would fight for the North. If Virginia went to the South, I would fight for the South. I would not raise my sword against my friends, family, and neighbors. Once I made my decision, I became an advisor to President Davis. Now, I did not receive a field command, which greatly upset me. I felt I should be in the field. He sent me out to Western Virginia to try and coordinate the generals out there. Western Virginia had felt abandoned by Richmond. They were always disregarded. They felt more closely tied to their business ties in Ohio and Pennsylvania. Now, these two generals that I had to deal with out there, they were both former governors of Virginia, and they were political adversaries. So they were not going to cooperate with one another, and made my life miserable from August of 1861 until October of 1861. I was eventually recalled back to Richmond, and the newspapers had a field day with me, saying, "This General Lee, he is not the general we thought he would be." Well, fortunately, the president didn't lose heart in me, and he sent me down to the Carolinas and Georgia and Florida to shore up the shore defenses, being that I was an engineer. The governors down there didn't want anything to do with me. They had read the newspapers from Richmond, and it was down there in the Carolinas where I received my first nickname, or my second nickname, the King of Spades. It's because I had the men digging entrenchments, and they said, "This is not white man's work, this is slave labor." Well, they would soon learn the value of being able to dig a trench. In May of 1862, I was recalled back to Richmond, as the Federal Army was within 5 miles of the city. And when I arrived there, and I climbed up in the church steeples, I could see this massive army of over 100,000 men within 5 miles of the city. And I sent word to General Johnston that I was here, and if he needed assistance, I was willing to help out. But he never contacted me. I rode out to the battle line, seeing curiosity got the better part of me. And as I arrived out there, I ran into President Davis, who also wasn't receiving any information General Johnston. General Johnston rode up to us and gave us great salutations and then was off to the sound of the guns. Half hour later, we received word that he was seriously wounded, quite possibly mortally. And as the president and I turned around to ride back into Richmond, the president turned to me and said, "General Lee, the Army is now yours." And this is how I would become the commanding general of the Army of Northern Virginia. Thank you.
Anybody here know who I am? I'm very disappointed. I'm from your state. My hometown is west of here, or east of here, in Monroe, Michigan. Adopted hometown. Shame on you for not knowing who I am. I'm General George Armstrong Custer. And on my tie here is a pin I had designed at Tiffany's in New York City. And on this pin, it says Custer, and also says Tuabor. Does anybody know what Tuabor means? It means I will defend. You know where else you can see Tuabor? It's on your state flag. It's the motto of the state of Michigan. So next time you see the flag, look on there and you'll see Tuabor. When the war started, I had just graduated West Point Military Academy, the second class of 1861, and I graduated 34th in my class. Sounds pretty good. And when 132 started out in our class in 1857, well, about half of them left to go fight for the South. They left West Point. The rest of them flunked out, and by the time we graduated, there were 34 of us left. But I graduated, and that's what counts. When I graduated, I was sent to Washington City. And I got an audience with General Winfield Scott, who was the General-in-Chief of the Federal Forces at that time. And he asked me, "Custer, we've got all these troops, new troops. We need them trained. And I'd like you to train them for us, since you're a West Point graduate." And told him, "General, sir, I don't really want to do that. I want to get a command in the field." And he replied to me, "Well, I actually hope that's what you would say." And he gave me some patches to take out to General McDowell, who was in the field near Bull Run. He told me to get a horse and get out there as quick as I could. Well, in Washington City at the time, there were no horses available. They were all being used by the Army. And I got pretty despondent. I walked around for a day, and I finally came across a corporal from West Point who was in the artillery training there, and he was bringing a couple horses out to the Army in the field. And we talked, and he asked if I'd like to ride one of them out there for him. I said, "Well, sure. I really need a horse." So we rode for a day and a half and got out to near Bull Run. And I got an audience. I brought the dispatch to General McDowell, commander in the field. And he thanked me and asked if I'd ate. And, well, I hadn't ate for 3 days. I said, "Well, my horse needs fed. Take care of him." And I was given orders to report to Company G, 2nd U.S. Cavalry. These were regulars. When I got there, I ran across a friend from Michigan, and he asked if I'd ate, and I said, "No, I haven't." And he got me a meal of coffee and steak, one of my favorite meals. And I was given charge of a platoon in Company G, and that's how I started out in the Civil War. I hope you learned a lot this weekend, and I'm glad you been able to make it here. And don't forget, George Armstrong Custer is from Michigan. Thank you.
Guten Morgen, meinen kleinen Studenten. Ich bin Chaplain Reichman of the. Oh, excuse me. I started in German again. You see, German is my first language. I immigrated to America at the age of 17 from Germany, and so American is my second language. That's probably why I became a chaplain of the 58th Ohio Volunteer Infantry Regiment. You see, when President Lincoln decided to raise regiments from all the northern states, he allowed each regiment to have a chaplain. Now, the chaplain was chosen this way. All of the officers of the regiment would have a vote to elect a chaplain. That name would then go to the governor of the state in which the regiment was raised. In my case, it was the governor of Ohio. If he approved the name, then it would go to Washington and the desk of the Secretary of War. There, he approved it and then issued the documents for the chaplain's commissioning. I was commissioned in April of 1862, and I joined my regiment in May of that year. Now, when you take a look at the regiment, it is full of manuals. Manuals for the sergeants, manuals for the officers, manuals on how to pitch a tent, how to camp, how to fight in the battle. There's a manual for everything the Army does, except for the chaplain. We had no manual. And so each chaplain had to create his ministry according to the needs that he saw in front of him in his regiment. So, for example, for me, I discovered that my regiment spoke mostly German, but there were several companies, about 400 men, who only spoke English. And so every Sunday I would have two services. One at 6 in the morning for the Germans, and I spoke German. And one 6 in the evening, and I spoke English for the English-speaking soldiers. I also discovered something else. You see, most of the Germans and most of the Americans in this regiment were Catholic. I am a Lutheran minister. And so immediately I had to decide, I am going to continue my ministry using the Lutheran liturgy and speak as if I was speaking to a Lutheran audience in hope to convert some of my Catholic followers. Well, what else did we do? Well, in my case, I was appointed not only chaplain, but postmaster. On an average day, I would have over 100 letters come to my desk in which I would have to sign and stamp so that those letters from the soldiers could get home without paying postage. That took a great deal of my time. I also found out that some soldiers wanted prayer meetings and Bible studies, and I arranged to have those happen within the regiment. During battle, we received an order from our commanding general, General Halleck. He said that all chaplains were to take charge of the men assigned to take the wounded off of the battlefield in the midst of battle. Now, after the Civil War was over, 2 chaplains would receive the Medal of Honor for taking men off of the battlefield under heavy fire. And several chaplains died while doing that. In fact, 12 chaplains in total died during the Civil War due to being shot or wounded or died of their wounds in battle. About 119 chaplains died while in service, 12 in battle, a handful because of accidents, but over 100 died due to disease. If you take a look at any regimental after the battle report and their casualty list, you will notice that more men died of disease than died in battle, because disease was rampant throughout the armies. And so chaplains had to do a great deal of funerals, baptisms, communions, and on the rare occasion, if an officer wanted to get married, we married. Chaplains became very important because faith was very important, not only to the Union Army, but also to the Confederate Army. Faith enabled them to do their duty with honor, to do their duty diligently, and to face death, which they did, both disease and on the battlefield, to face death with faith and courage. And that was the job of not only the Union chaplain, but the Confederate chaplains as well. Thank you.